It's Learning to Listen, Conversations for Change, and I'm your host, Joshua Sparrow at the Brazelton Touchpoint Center. To find out more about the Brazelton Touchpoint Center and Learning to Listen, just go to brazeltontouchpoints.org and click on Learn with Us and look for Learning to Listen in the Conversations section. There's also a link there to our archive of Learning to Listen conversations over the years. To learn more about and register for more Brazelton Touchpoint Center conversations, events, and trainings, click on the link in the chat. To join the Brazelton Touchpoint Center's Learning Network, look for that link in the chat too. Thank you so much for joining us. Today, we will be learning about how unjust evictions harm Black mothers and babies with Professor Shawnita Sealy-Jefferson, founder, director, and principal investigator of the Social Epidemiology to Eliminate Disparities lab. In a moment, you'll see why her work is so important. But first, a bit of information about today's Learning to Listen episode. Nearly 700 of us have registered for today's webinar. Please do feel free to tell us about you and where you're from and what you do in the chat, as I see many of you already have. Today, our superb interpreter, Maria Jose Gutierrez, joining us from Bogota, Colombia, will be simultaneously translating our webinar in Spanish. Thank you, Maria Jose, as always. To access the translation, click on the interpretation icon in your Zoom controls. Then select Spanish. To mute the English in the background, select Mute Original Audio. La conversación de hoy será en español e inglés. En los controles de esta reunión, haga clic en Interpretación. Haga clic en el idioma que le gustaría escuchar. Para escuchar solo español, haga clic en Silenciar audio original. To turn closed captioning on, just click on the closed caption icon in your Zoom controls and select Show Subtitle. You can adjust the size of the subtitles. Please use the chat feature if you have a comment to share or need help with a technical issue. We're eager to hear your thoughts. And please do put your questions for Professor Sealy-Jefferson in the Q&A box. We do hope to have time to get to your questions as we come towards the end of today's episode of Learning to Listen. If you would like to receive a certificate of attendance for today's webinar, please be sure you complete the feedback survey. The survey will open in your web browser when this webinar ends. You will also receive a link to the survey tomorrow in a thank you email from us. Before we begin, I want to thank our sponsors, the Burke Foundation, Cambridge Trust, and Berkshire Bank, and our Brazelton Touchpoint Center production team, Isabella Mantilla, Michael Accardi, and Suzanne Okasik. And now I'd like to introduce today's guest, Dr. Shawnita Sealy-Jefferson. Dr. Sealy-Jefferson is a social epidemiologist whose primary research seeks action to combat manifestations of structural racism that limit the human rights of Black families and communities. Dr. Sealy-Jefferson is the founder, director, and principal investigator of the Social Epidemiology to Eliminate Disparities lab. The mission of the SEED lab is to conduct high-quality epidemiologic research to find solutions to the disproportionate burden of infant mortality among Black women. Dr. Sealy-Jefferson's scholar-activism draws from the Reproductive Justice Framework and seeks to, number one, empirically document associations between systems of oppression and preterm birth, which is the leading cause of infant death. Number two, to explicate the intervening biologic, social, and psychosocial mechanisms, as well as, number three, to identify effect modifiers of these associations among Black women. The goal of her scholarship is to inform future intervention studies, policy change, and social activism. To this end, Dr. Sealy-Jefferson is the principal investigator of the Social Epidemiology to Combat Unjust Residential Evictions studies, which is referred to as SECURE, S-E-C-U-R-E, funded by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. In partnership with the Community Advisory Board of Black Women Leaders, the SECURE study will document for the first time the magnitude and severity of court-ordered and illegal residential evictions, as well as their impact on the health of Black families in Metro Detroit in Michigan. This participatory action research study will prioritize community power and agency and center the voices, experiences, and ways of knowing of Black women. As Dr. Sealy-Jefferson says, the SECURE study is unapologetically for us, by us, and our work is grounded in housing is a human right and Black Lives Matter. Dr. Sealy-Jefferson, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sparrow, for the invitation, and to the Brazelton team for your work. I'm going to share my screen now, and then we'll get started. So I would like to start this conversation with offering solidarity and respect to those participating in the global protest against the ongoing apartheid, genocide, violence, and other humanitarian crises in Sudan, Haiti, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and Gaza, including those recently led by very brave students across the country whose moral clarity and righteous principled resistance in calling for a ceasefire and an end to the occupation in Gaza has been met with violent institutional brutality and repression. This moral bankruptcy is breathtaking. And in the words of Saint Toni Morrison, I insist on being shocked. We deserve a better world than this, and we have to create it. So first things first, I have to just be very clear about the fact that my identities absolutely inform my work. I am a Black woman, a partner, a mother, a highly sensitive INFJ, a Detroiter, a first-generation college student and graduate. I'm a social epidemiologist, and I don't get to choose between scholarship and activism. I have to do both. I am in the academy, and my primary allegiance is to the liberation of my own community. I also trust myself and my ancestral memories and my various ways of knowing. And in social epidemiology, our central guiding question is who and what is responsible for inequities in population health. And as a reminder, inequalities are considered inequities when they are avoidable, unnecessary, and unfair. So I want to also remind you of the very deep and comprehensive conversation that was led last month by Professor Kiara Bridges. And I'm going to show you some social health inequalities and inequities in the United States. And we see in this table that across various social determinants of health and adverse health outcomes, people from the global majority compared to white people are made vulnerable to and experience disadvantage in multiple ways. And I want to point to the fact that Black people do worse than all other racial ethnic groups on most of these things. So no matter if we're looking at wealth or poverty or incarceration rates or potential life loss, no matter what we look at when we compare the rates and proportions of the population who experience these adverse social and health inequalities and inequities in the United States, we see racial disparities that have persisted across time. So a lot of my work is focused on preterm birth, which is, as Dr. Sparrow mentioned, it is the leading cause of infant death. And I'm showing you a figure that shows the infant death rates over time from 1915 to 2017. And in this figure, we can see the rates over time for infant mortality for everybody when we look at everybody together, and then the results stratified by race, ethnicity. So we see the rate for Black and the rate for white infants, and then we see the Black-white ratio, which is documented with the Black line. Unfortunately, compared to other industrialized nations, the United States ranks very poorly in terms of infant mortality compared to its peers. And I want to direct your attention to the most stunning part of this figure, which is that in 1916, Black mothers were 87% more likely than white mothers to bury their babies before their first birthday. And in the year 2017, Black mothers were 122% more likely to bury their babies before their first birthday than white mothers. 1916, 87%. 2017, 122% more likely. This data tells me something very specific, that every single public health intervention, every research, everything that has been tried didn't work at the population level. And the reason that it didn't work is because the root cause of these inequities has not been addressed. That's the only way that these data make sense. In order to understand and make sense of the stark and persistent and disgusting inequities in infant mortality in this case, but all poor health and early mortality among Black communities, I argue that historical context is key. Here I'm showing a timeline of the history of Black country, with 1619 marking the first record of African chattel slavery here. From 1619 to 1964, that equals 345 years of inequitable treatment, poor health status, and absent or inferior medical care for Black people. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 was 60 years ago now, and it was supposed to end segregation in public places and ban employment discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. And we have evidence that this legislation did not do what it was created to do. So from 1964 till now, that represents 14% of the history of Black people in this country. And I argue that this historical context, as well as unequal starting points, have health impacts across generations. And the history of Black people in this country is unlike that of any other racial or ethnic group. And this history matters for the current population levels of adverse health, early death, shorter, sicker lives that we see. Now I want to talk about residential evictions. This is one of the most harmful sources of housing instability. We know that court-ordered residential evictions happen to about 2.3 million low-income renters every year. This is an important determinant of health. And we know that formal evictions or landlord-initiated forced moves are very pervasive in this society. They have gotten worse over time. We know that poor women of color, specifically Black women who have children, as well as those who are domestic violence survivors, are more likely to be evicted from their homes than every other group in this country. And Matthew Desmond is the sociologist that pioneered the study of evictions in society. And he said, eviction is to Black women what mass incarceration is to Black men. Both of these are a cause and a consequence of poverty. We know that eviction is among the most understudied issue affecting minoritized people and results in financial hardship, insecurity, powerlessness, depression, even suicide. So what we don't have a whole lot of data about are illegal evictions. So those evictions that do not go through the courts, including illegal strong arm lockouts, as well as unofficial orders for tenants to vacate a rental property, happen about 50% of the time. And we don't have any documentation about how much this happens. So the figure is showing you a comparison of eviction rates over time. My work is focused on Michigan, so I'm showing the rates in Michigan compared to the United States. And we see that with available data from 2000 to 2016, that the rates of eviction in Michigan exceed the rates in the United States overall. We also know that illegal evictions are significantly less expensive and more efficient than court-ordered evictions for landlords. In response to this, we are undertaking, secure study is currently underway. This is a mixed methodology, community-based participatory action research project focused on 3 counties in Michigan, Wayne, Oakland, and Macomb County. We are documenting the magnitude and severity of court-ordered and illegal evictions and how they impact Black women, families, and communities. Secure Study has a community advisory board of grassroots organizers, advocates, community-based leaders, activists. We have a whole range of people who have lived experience and professional expertise around housing justice. And those with lived experience also are members of our community advisory board. And we have 2 projects that we are focused on in Secure Study. One focused on court-ordered neighborhood evictions. And to do this, we are using some secondary data analysis to quantify neighborhood eviction rates over time and how they matter for Black women's birth and maternal outcomes. And then we've done probably over a dozen focus groups so far, where we get Black women's experiences living in a neighborhood where they see other people evicted. And then individual level court-ordered and illegal evictions, we are fielding a survey right now. Our goal is to get 1,600 surveys completed from Black women who live in Wayne, Oakland, or Macomb County, Michigan, who are parents or have a parenting role. And then we also will be doing some in-depth interviews with about 20 women from each of the 3 counties that we're focused on to get their experiences with illegal evictions. So we want to know how did the landlord do the eviction? What happened? Where did you go? These kinds of things. I'm going to talk a little bit more about what we're specifically asking in these three data collection efforts. So in the survey, we are getting individual level court-ordered and illegal eviction data. So I'm asking about our participants' demographics, about their work status, about their current residence and their residential history, which is going to be important for tracking eviction rates over time. I'm asking about their children and their children's health, about whether they experience court-ordered and or illegal evictions in the past, throughout their life, and mental and physical health outcomes. We're also asking about racial identity, socialization, and discrimination. And then one of the key things that we are making sure to collect data on our resistance strategy. So I'm asking questions about their self-care, their advocacy, how much they do community service, whether they support other people in their neighborhood, socially or financially. So all types of ways in which Black women might be resisting this violence that a lot of our community is experiencing. In the focus groups I mentioned, we are trying to get evidence about the community level impact of eviction. So what is it like when you live in a neighborhood where you see other people evicted? So we are asking in our focus groups, have you seen anyone being evicted in your neighborhood? Have you personally experienced an eviction in your neighborhood? Are there any neighborhood level supports for people who experience court ordered or illegal eviction? Do you see neighbors helping neighbors? How do court-ordered evictions impact communities, families, and individual people's health? So it's stunning because a lot of our participants know exactly what's happening, even if it isn't happening to them. They are very thoughtful about how they think these experiences of violence are negatively impacting people's mental and physical health, how it's impacting the look and feel and experience in the neighborhood. And then importantly, we're also asking our participants about their ideas for society level changes that we need in order to address this problem. And then in the in-depth interviews, we're getting individual level illegal eviction data. So this qualitative data, we're asking, the questions are around when did it happen? Where were there any agreements made between you and the landlord? How much notice did the landlord give? How did the landlord do the illegal eviction? What was the reason that they gave? What was the reason that you understood to be the reason for the illegal eviction? About communication between the landlord and the tenant. After the illegal eviction, where did you go? How long did you stay? Where did you, how long did it take for you to retrieve your items? Did you ever replace your items? So we're asking a whole bunch of questions about their experience so that Black women are able to tell their own stories and also identify points along the process where they maybe needed social services that they didn't get. So I want to just point to some preliminary data from our focus group. So it's not surprising. We expected that living in a neighborhood where you see your neighbors evicted is traumatic. This has negative mental health impacts. It results in community destabilization. There's a lot of stigma around eviction. And we noticed this when our first version of our recruitment flyer had eviction on it. And very quickly, I got feedback that, people didn't want to have anything to do with secure study because of the stigma associated with eviction. Even if they had experienced an eviction, they didn't even want me to hand them a flyer that had eviction on it because of the stigma. And I have this quote on the screen from one of our focus group participants, and it just shows the complexity of housing instability caused by eviction. So this woman said, I had an eviction and the court gave me a little bit of time to move. But the next day, the landlord sent some goons to my house threatening us, and we just left. So this is an example of a family experiencing a court-ordered and an illegal eviction within a 24-hour period. So it's not either or. Sometimes people experience both. And this is an example of a family experiencing both a court-ordered and an illegal eviction. And from what she said, there's literally no recourse. There's no consequences to landlords who do that, which is violating people's civil and human rights. So this is just a screenshot of our website. We have some current, this is old. So we have people come and go on the community advisory board. We have teachers, we have nurses, we have people who were former participants of secure study who have transitioned to being on our board because there's so much power, there's so much advocacy, there's so many people doing community organizing and community healing work. And because I meet everybody, sometimes I meet people and I think, oh, you would be great on our board. And then after they participate, I say, hey, do you want to have a conversation about potentially joining our board? Because I think you would add, and you would be able to help us push our mission forward. And a lot of them graciously agree. We also have our research team, former and current research team members. I would not be able to do my job if Black women didn't help me. So I always, when I talk about secure study, I always want to be clear about that. I have a lot of people who are helping me do various things. A lot of my former Seed Lab members who have transitioned from our institution to medical school and to film school and to just all kinds of things. They literally helped set the foundation for what we're doing. And the work matters for a lot of reasons, but it also matters because these people are helping. They are literally with their own hands helping to be a part of a solution to a problem that we do not have to accept. I've been doing a lot of on the ground community engagement, and it feels like organizing to me, community organizing. So this is a research study. I'm an academic, and I am a member of the community that my work is in service of. So I'm not doing research on this community. I am in the community, a member of the community. My work is in service of our shared liberation. And so I do the absolute most to get the data that we need to create a better world. And I'm trying to share with people in my community about the stakes. A lot of us have daughters, so I meet everybody that participates in my study. We could have a whole nother conversation about the obstacles to me leading a study like this with my identities in an institutional context that I'm in and in the world context that we're in. But I have probably 3,500 people, some of them are bots, that have signed up for a secure study who are not Black women from all over the United States and all over the world. People are physically in China. Like, I can see where people are trying to take the screening survey from. Physically in Indonesia, signing up for a study that's for Black women in 3 counties in Michigan. So anyway, because of that, I have to meet every single person who participates, and I have to verify that they are eligible to participate before they participate, because I am invested in making sure that the data from Secure Study is valid, it's reliable. Nobody participates unless they go through me, because we need this data, or this problem is going to be our daughter's problem. And so in the middle picture, you see, I was invited to set up a table and recruit for Secure Study at a domestic violence event, an event honoring domestic violence survivors. It was an educational event. They were talking about financial literacy and like a whole bunch of things. But this picture is funny to me because my hands are like this. So I'm imagining that I was saying, I don't know what I was saying, but I'm imagining, because I say this all the time. I'm like, do you have daughters? And a lot of people say, yes, I do. And I say, I have a daughter too. My baby is 15. So you mean to tell me we're supposed to be okay with our daughters growing up, becoming Black women, and having a higher chance of being evicted from their home than their white coworkers just because they're Black and women? And before I get done with the sentence, usually people are shaking their head no. And I say, exactly, we do not accept this. We have to do something about this problem, or it's going to be our daughter's problem. And the way I know it's going to be our daughter's problem is this was our mother's problem and their mother's. So common sense would say that if we don't do something, it's going to be our daughter's problem. I try to go to community events as much as I can, as much as my schedule allows, because I want to just tell people what the stakes are. This other picture here is, you see the 2 women holding a Secure Study flyer. One of them is on our community advisory board. And when the eviction court went from online on Zoom during the height of the pandemic to in person, Cassie convened a group of women, went down to the eviction court, 36th District Court, and they were handing out my flyer to women and families who were experiencing eviction. So this is just some of the grassroots organizing that we're doing in Secure Study out in the community, telling people what the stakes are, telling people how they can get involved, and encouraging people to share their story. So you can see on the flyer, the first line on the flyer and on the billboard is, Black women, share your story and help our community. So I'm trying to provide a space for Black women to tell our own stories. And then I usually say, people listen to me because I have a PhD. So I said, okay, cool. Since y'all are listening, I'm going to raise the voices of 1,800 Black women from my community, and we're going to demand change. That 1,800 people is too many people to ignore. So also, I wanted to plug this documentary, this film that came out last year, at the beginning of last year, Locked Out. You can go to lockedoutfilm.com. It's a documentary that really chronicles the work of Black women in Detroit who are resisting this system of oppression that we are experiencing. And it follows people who are facing an eviction for, tax foreclosure, for, inhabitable housing, a whole bunch of different scenarios, and just shows really the depth of the depravity of a lot of the landlords that our community has to rent from. The film has won a lot of awards already. It's in the film festival circuit, but you can go and watch the trailer. You'll notice my work. The director said that my words inspired the title of the film. And I just said what Matthew Desmond said, that, Black men are locked up, Black women are locked out of our housing. And that's how Locked Out Film got its name. The bottom picture is me speaking about public health, this public health issue with the mayor of Columbus, Ohio, Mayor Andrew Ginther, and Columbus City Council member Shayla Favor. They screened Locked Out Film in Columbus at the beginning of the year, and I was on a panel with these people talking about the film and about housing instability caused by eviction in Columbus and in Detroit. And my study is focused on Detroit, Metro Detroit. But this is impacting people all over the country. It's not just a Detroit thing. And that's something that really came out in our discussion. And then this other picture is we had an inaugural Detroit Tenant Association meeting, and we were advocating for Detroit renters to organize and to come together and to share our experiences and to demand our elected officials do their job, which is to protect renters and families from a lot of the unscrupulous landlords that a lot of people are experiencing. So they asked me to come. I said, yes, I'll come. They said, do you want to say something? I said, give me the mic. So I got the mic and I got on stage, and I've just said like what this is not accidental. The fact that Black women who have children and domestic violence survivors are more likely to be evicted from their homes, and it's not because we don't pay rent. It's not the reason. And we don't have any evidence about how much this happens or what it does to us mentally or physically. And there's a saying, no data, no problem. There is a huge problem here. So Secure Study is trying to get the empirical evidence that we need in order to demand change. So I like to end my comments with this quote from Grace Lee Boggs. Grace was a Chinese-American philosopher, writer, and activist in Detroit. For decades, she was a prominent public face of a particularly Detroit brand of activism. She was a one-time Marxist and a Chinese-American whose ideological evolution led her to Black revolution, Black power, neighborhood organization, and educational reform. She was an unrelenting critic of the cultural and economic conditions that contributed to Detroit's decline, with a keen focus on the struggles of the city's economic underclass. Her fierce intellect was uncompromising, and I think that's something that I'm drawn to about Grace and her work. She demanded a constant evaluation of the ideas and assumptions, and her guidance nurtured generations of activists who continue to play a role in the struggle to define and shape the city that Boggs called her home and I call my home. So Grace Lee Boggs said, you cannot change any society unless you take responsibility for it, unless you see yourself as belonging to it and responsible for changing. And I want to just end with some acknowledgments. Like I said, I wouldn't be able to do my job if Black women didn't help me, and also my Seed Lab, Secure Study research team, Community Advisory Board, our funders. Robert Wood Johnson Foundation has been amazing. They literally believed in my vision for the work. I had a very ambitious plan. Actually, it was crazy. The plan was crazy, but we are doing it. So it must not have been, it wasn't too crazy because we are literally doing it. But I don't know how they saw, anyway, big shout out to Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. I also had this QR code of a recent NPR segment that I did talking about our first Secure Study publication. In that secondary data analysis, we are showing how neighborhood eviction rates over time, so before pregnancy and during pregnancy, how it's related to psychological distress during pregnancy among Black women. And we're showing a 2 to 4-fold higher odds of psychological distress during pregnancy for Black women who live in neighborhoods with increasing eviction rates over time. And psychological distress during pregnancy is an important thing to talk about because we know that about 80% of maternal deaths are preventable. We also know that a leading cause of maternal death is poor mental health. So what we're doing is we're pointing to, a lot of people are talking about people's poor choices, about people's biology, about people's access to medical care. And we're pointing to the context in which people are living. So it's not just about my own individual experiences with eviction. It's also about living in a neighborhood where you see other people evicted. So not my own experiences. Maybe it's my experience, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the neighborhoods that people live in as a site of violence that negatively impacts Black pregnant women's mental health. And so the QR code takes you directly to the NPR segment, and you can listen to see what I say. I was amazed at what actually made it into the segment. But anyway, Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you all for being here. I look forward to our conversation. I'm going to stop my share now.
Thank you so much, Professor Sealy-Jefferson. Really urgent presentation and such important research. I have tons of questions, but in order to encourage other people to bring theirs, I'm going to start with one that's in the Q&A box. Here we go. With Head Start, we ask parents how would they rate their knowledge of community resources to get the things they need. Knowing what resources are available could help so many families with eviction and especially illegal eviction. Would you think of adding a question like this to your study?
We are asking people about resources that they needed but didn't get, about social support that they would have needed but didn't have access to. So this is a very important question. I also have a lot of people who have participated in secure study or who are thinking about participating, coming to me, texting or emailing or finding me on social media and saying, do you have any resources for people who are experiencing all kinds of things that are not related to secure study, but just all kinds of things. So what we did is we have a list of resources on our website, and we kind of direct people to a Google document that we have, a Google sheet where we have mutual aid organizations. We have, mental health resources for people, because that's a big issue, is poor mental health. And we know that, a lot of our communities are underserved in terms of mental health care. We direct people there, but having one place with the resources that people might need is a challenge, because sometimes even on our website, so we have resources that were there in 2021 that were available. The funding ran out. The moratorium on evictions expired. So a lot of these resources are no longer available. And so updating the websites and the resource hubs is something that a lot of people don't have the staff capacity to keep up with. So it's a huge issue. There's a lot of people who need services, but don't actually get it because it's complicated. They don't know where to go. A lot of unfortunately, what we hear in literally every focus group that we do, people talk about how mean and nasty and condescending a lot of the social service workers are. So that even knowing where the resources are and actually receiving the resources that you need, there's a huge disconnect, because sometimes people are working in these social service sectors and they don't care about the people that they're supposed to be serving. So that's a huge thing that's coming out very loudly in our data that we're going to have to talk about. You shouldn't be in these kind of social service, community service roles if you don't actually care about the people's dignity and humanity that you're supposed to be serving.
Exactly, dignity and humanity. And just to say that so much of the work of our little center for the past 25 years has been about changing those hearts and minds, so that everyone's humanity and dignity is fully embraced. There is a question from one of your fans that I will bring to you, and I am your fan and her fan too. Karen Howard, thank you. She is thanking you for your groundbreaking research. And she's asking, can you share the percentages of Black mothers and families who faced child protective services as a result of being unhoused or evicted? And I'll just add, I recently looked into this whole question of how so many families of color end up being investigated for so-called child neglect, when actually it's only about being unhoused or evicted or not having living wages. So tell us what you can about the percentage of Black mothers and families who face child protective services as a result of being unhoused or evicted.
Thank you, Karen, for this question. I am not asking direct, so I haven't looked at the data. So we have about 1,300 surveys. So we are almost done with these surveys. And I've been telling people I do not know what I'm going to find when I analyze this data, but I'm 100% sure it's going to be disgusting. And the reason that I know it's going to be disgusting is because I meet everybody. I talk to everybody. I verify people are eligible. And when we're on Zoom, people tell me all kinds of stuff. So it's Child Protective Service involvement, which is family surveillance, and it's violence against families. It's not about the well-being of these kids. Unfortunately, I'm noticing just from my conversations, so I haven't run the numbers in the survey yet, but domestic violence, I'm not asking specifically about Child Protective Services or domestic violence that our participants have experiences with, but it's coming out because I'm asking, before you move to the place you currently live, where did you live? They tell me the address. Why did you move from there to where you are now? Domestic violence. And unfortunately, domestic violence is a big part of this conversation because a lot of domestic violence survivors are more likely to be evicted from their homes because if you call the police and you are a renter, the police can give your landlord a fine. The landlord can evict you because you called the police because you needed some help. Domestic violence victims, survivors, can be evicted because they called the police. The police come a lot of times. Child Protective Services comes because if children are in the place where there's violence happening, Child Protective Services, police are mandatory reporters. They have to report that. Sometimes I'm hearing from our participants that illegal evictions happen through this mechanism of landlords calling Child Protective Services on tenants. So it's very complicated. I'm nervous, actually, about the data analysis phase because I said I'm 100% sure it's going to be disgusting. There's clear crimes against humanity happening. I'm going to have to bear witness. I'm going to have to tell the truth about our experiences because they're saying no data, no problem. We can't be using that as a reason not to act. We know that Child Protective Service is a huge issue, but one of the things that I am asking in the survey, I have this adverse childhood experiences scale in the survey, and I'm asking about our participants before they turn 18, their experiences with a mother or a father being addicted to drugs or alcohol, whether they were in foster care. And a lot of them have been in foster care. So this is related to Karen's question about Child Protective Services, not just Child Protective Services in these adult women, but also their experiences with Child Protective Services when they were kids as a predictor of their adulthood experiences with housing instability is a question that we're going to be able to answer with our data. It's super complicated. It's so violent. This violence is so deep and ever present. And I'm so grateful for our participants for sharing their experiences. They're trusting us with their data, with their experiences, with their stories. And a lot of them say, I'm not doing this for a gift card. I don't care about a $50 gift card. I'm trying to help. I want to help so that other people aren't suffering the way that I suffer. And it's inspiring.
And as you say, so complicated because just about all of the social, political, economic, and racism-induced determinants of health and mental health, including Black mothers' health and mental health and preterm births, so much of it runs through housing. We might have time to come back to your thinking about how housing is this nexus where all of those things connect, but there are so many more questions here, and I want to go to a question from our colleague here at the Brazelton Touchpoint Center, Dr. Ernestine Brown, who asks this very important question: how do you balance telling the stories of lived experience with data that can be re-traumatizing while also anchoring the lessons you are elevating and are grounded in liberation?
I love this question. because I don't have it figured out. One of the things that we are trying to center are the truth about people's experiences. So, and we're doing quantitative and qualitative data because we know that the work that I'm doing is not that different from the work that W.E.B. Du Bois was doing in the 1800s. Okay. And W.E.B. Du Bois had a shift in his approach. He was initially collecting data. He was like, if I just get this evidence, if I just get this data and I show the data to the people who make the decisions, they will be moved. And then he realized that's never going to work. He lost his child. His child didn't get the medical care that they needed because he was Black and there were people being lynched. And he was like, we can all look at a set of data and we can have different interpretations of the data and come up with different actions as a result of that data. So we have to pair collecting data with activism. So that's sort of my I'm in that approach of data and activism. So numbers and stories and mutual aid and solidarity with the community that my work is in service of, and raising the voices and making room at the table for people who would never have an opportunity to be a part of the thinking work necessary to be advocating for solutions to this problem. I don't know. This is a very deep question. I didn't say this. I had it on the screen and I just remember that I didn't say it. In 1937, Zora Neale Hurston wrote a book called Their Eyes Were Watching God. And in that book, she said, if you're silent about your pain, they will kill you and say you enjoyed it. 1937. It's 2024. And I'm saying this to hundreds of Black women from my community. They are not going to keep killing us saying we liked it. So we're going to have to dig deep and find the courage to tell the truth about our experiences, even if our voice shakes, even if we turn red, even if we sweat. Because we have to show our kids what resistance looks like. What happens when Black women organize? What happens when we get together and raise our voices and demand change? What has happened every time this has happened? Change has happened. So we are just doing what Black women do. We do not accept this. We should not accept this. This is crazy. Why would we accept this? This is unacceptable. So we have to do something. And I think data is one of the first things we have to do. I can use my expertise as an epidemiologist to collect this data. And then we have to pair it with activism and grassroots organizing and radical truth telling. And I haven't figured it out. I'm going to be experimenting with a lot of strategies because, like I said, I'm nervous about what I'm going to find and how I'm going to have to talk about it. One of the things that I'm not going to do is present data in a way that pathologizes Black people and Black communities. So that's why this community advisory board is so important, because they help ground us. You can see from the picture that Professor Loretta Ross, one of the founders of the Reproductive Justice Framework, is on our board. She's one of my mentors, but she's on our community advisory board, and she helps us to go deep so that we don't do harm with the work. We don't do harm in asking people to share their stories. Also, we've been noticing that giving people an opportunity to share their pain and to be seen and valued and heard and cared for in the data collection is healing for a lot of people. To let them know that they're not alone, that we see them, we see their strength, we see the pain, and we also see the power. That's been useful to a lot of our participants. So thank you for this question. I'm going to be thinking about this for a while because I haven't figured it out yet.
Yeah, seeing the pain and the power. Yeah. And Professor Loretta Ross also was one of our guests on Learning to Listen. And when I first met you, you told me that she told you that you are the epidemiologist of reproductive justice, right? Did I get that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did a talk at Smith College in 2019, and she was in the front. She came to my talk. She was in the front row, and I almost fainted. I was like, Loretta, like who invited her? Who told her I was coming? With, like what? And then afterwards, she came up to me and said, "Girl, your work is the epidemiology of reproductive justice," and so that's what I've been calling my work these days.
Yeah. And that is what it is. There's so much more to learn from you, and so much more that I know you could expand on in your talk. I'm thinking about the last question that we had and your answer to it, and thinking that I want to be sure to give you time to tell us more about what we all can do. You talked about um, grassroots organizing. You talked about radical truth telling. You talked about activism. And I wondered if you could sort of say more about how you think about activism, where you see activism happening, and what it looks like. And maybe as a lead into that, if this doesn't make it too complicated, I wanted to go back to one of the last things that you did for us, which was to share that quote from Grace Lee Boggs. Um, you quoted her saying, "You cannot change any society unless you take responsibility for it, unless you see yourself as belonging to it and responsible for changing it." Um, so I thought there is some way in which starting there, do you find that there are different paths for people to be there or to get there, that then leads to whatever you can tell us about what activism actually looks like, so we can all figure out what we can do. And I know lots of folks who've joined us today are already doing a ton, but I think we all want to know what else we can do to um, completely turn this around for the next generation.
Thank you. I love this question. Now, I led with on the first things first slide with a little couple of things about me. Um, the fact that I'm a highly sensitive INFJ is a big part of my identity. So I think we don't spend enough time on personal development, individual personal development. And so that is a whole bunch of things. That could be therapy. That could be healing your own individual traumas from the past. That could be figuring out what your strengths are, figuring out what your personality type is, figuring out what you are actually on the planet to do and doing that. Okay. So sometimes people find people who are successful and they copy what those successful people are doing, and they think that that's the path. That's not the path, because I think all of us are on the planet for a very specific purpose. And I think all of us should, however much time you're spending on personal development, I think you can triple it, because each of us has to figure out what we are on the planet to do, and we have to do exactly that. Now, if I didn't spend the last 8 years on personal development, so it's a journey. It's also not about something you can like achieve. This is like you unveiling yourself more and more all the time, going inside, asking and answering the question of who are you? Like, who are you at your core? Not who you're in relationship with, not who you work for, not who you are a parent to, not none of that. I'm talking about who are you inside? Like at your core, who are you? I can articulate who I am at my core, and luckily who I am at my core and what I do for a living overlap. Okay, I'm able to, at my core, I'm just going to indulge, and please indulge me. At my core, I find and help underdogs. I believe God has my back. I calculate odds for a living, but I don't think the odds against me matter. So I defy odds, and I fight injustice. That's me at my core, 4 things. I'm also a highly sensitive person. I'm a highly sensitive INFJ. People with my personality type are very interested in other people's personal development. So it wouldn't be a shock. If you know anything about INFJs, you wouldn't be surprised that now I'm ending a talk on epidemiology with personal development. I know who I am and I know what I'm supposed to be doing, and I'm trying to do it. I think all of us can do some of that work so that we, in our own way, in our own space, can be a part of the solution in our own way. Do the thing that you are on the planet to do. Sometimes students say, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And I say, okay, so let's start somewhere. If you just randomly pick the problem, randomly pick one, and dedicate yourself to doing something about that problem, I think if everybody did that, we wouldn't have so many problems. So you can start there. Grace Lee Boggs, her quote, I like this quote a lot. I like a lot of things that she says a lot, that she has said a lot. But this quote for me is like, sometimes in public health, especially, a lot of times we talk about these inequities by race. And it's like, usually it's just data and people are like, oh, that's so horrible. I wish somebody would do something about that. I think somebody should do something about that because I think that's unacceptable. And usually I'm just like, but you're somebody though. All of us are somebody, right? So to me, it's my responsibility. You know, I talked about my baby. My baby is 15. She just turned 15. If I don't do, I feel an urgency because I know who I am at my core and I know what I have. I'm uniquely qualified to do the thing that I'm on the planet to do. If I don't do it, people are going to suffer. One of the people who is going to suffer is my daughter, who's a Black young lady, who's going to be a Black woman soon. Inner work is the path. Personal development is the path. All of us can do that. We don't have to. You can watch TED Talks. You can watch, you can read self-help books. You can get a therapist. You can forgive your parent. You can, I mean, there's a whole bunch of things to do. There's so many things to do in so little time. Sometimes people say, I'm just going to identify my weaknesses and try to improve on my weaknesses. I think that's a waste of time. Okay, nobody's gonna ever have a life with no weaknesses. So why would you spend any time trying to improve on your weaknesses? You're never gonna achieve that. So I think it's a better use of time to figure out what you're good at, figure out what you have natural skill and natural talent at, and design your life around those things, because you're not good at something because you're not supposed to be doing it. The things that I'm not good at, I don't do them. I just do not do them. I get somebody else to do it. So I always, whenever I get an opportunity, I always end with please, 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 however much time you're spending on personal development and inner work, triple it, because we don't get time, we don't get space, we don't get an opportunity to ask ourselves, who are you and what are you on the planet to do? What do? We spend all this time on professional development, degrees and credentials and training and hard skills that don't actually help us to do the meaningful work that we are on the planet to do in a way that makes us feel like the work of our hands is mattering. I also think that they are banning critical race theory, and they're weaponizing critical race theory and banning books on purpose, because there's a lot that has already been written by a lot of very smart people decades ago that will help us to understand what we are dealing with right now and how to proceed. If you don't do the reading, you will not understand what this is. You will not know what to do. You will waste time, and you don't have a lot of time. You know, you can be here today and you can be gone today, not tomorrow. So personal development is the move. All of us can do that, and all of us need some clarity. When I walk into a room, I don't have to say, I'm in here, I'm here. I don't have to say that. People just know I'm clear, so everybody around me is clear. I wish more people had that clarity. because it's the key. It's the key to doing what you're on the planet to do. And if you don't do it, all of us suffer.
Well, you certainly, I think, have helped a lot of us move forward with our inner work. One comment says, "You have helped my fear of what I know I'm meant to do. Thanks for your work. I'm so encouraged." Uh, I feel the same way. I'm sure many people do. Thank you so much for sharing your work, for shining a light on the data, on what we all can do and where we all can start and how we can move forward. Can't appreciate you enough, Professor Sealy-Jefferson. And thank you. I hope you'll all come back in September, on September 25th. We have another fierce advocate for reproductive justice who is a specialist in IVF, in vitro fertilization, Dr. Samuel Pang. That's September 25th. Thank you for joining us today, and we hope to see you all again soon.